I have here an article from the BBC dated December 21st, 2021. This thing's hot off the presses. The article's titled, "Family Estrangement: Why Adults Are Cutting Off Their Parents." Let me read to you. It was a heated Skype conversation about race relations that led Scott to cut off all contact with his parents in 2019. His mother was angry that he'd supported a civil rights activist on social media, he says. He claims that she said a lot of really awful, racist things while his 7-year-old son was in earshot. There was very much a parental feeling like, you can't say that in front of my child. That's not the way that we're going to raise our kids, explains the father of 2 who lives in Northern Europe. Scott says that the final straw came when his father tried to defend his mother's viewpoint in an email which included a link to a white supremacist video. He was baffled his parents could not comprehend the reality of people being victimized because of their background, especially given his own family history. "This is insane," he said. "You're Jewish." It wasn't the first time that Scott had experienced a clash in values with his parents, but it was the last time that he chose to see or speak to them. Despite a lack of hard data, there is a growing perception among therapists, psychologists, and sociologists that this kind of intentional parent-child breakup is on the rise in Western countries. So what about here in Alaska? Over the last 10 years that I've had the privilege of doing ministry in our great state, I have lost track of the number of times that I've been told this story, either from one perspective or the other. "Help, please pray for me. My children won't speak to me. Help, please pray for me. I cannot handle the behavior of my parents." Now, in every generation, there is tension and difficulty between parents and adult children. The first generation to experience this was Cain and Abel, right? Like, this has been going on. But both from my own personal experience and from a growing body of data and research, it seems that my generation, the millennials, people our age, are having a more difficult time than past generations in establishing a healthy adult-to-adult ongoing relationship with our parents. Now, for my really wild claim, I believe that if we want to bridge this generational divide and have healthy relationships with our parents, the solution is not going to come from a new technique. It's going to come from some ancient wisdom. We're in a series on the 10 Commandments this month. Today we're looking at the 5th commandment. Let me read it to you from Exodus chapter 20, verse 12. Here's the 5th commandment. "Honor your father and your mother so that you may live long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you." Now, depending on what your relationship with your parents is like, that might be easy to hear or it might be hard to hear. For some of us today, this is going to be a reminder to honor parents who we already appreciate and respect. For others, this is going to be God ripping the Band-Aid off of a deep, deep wound. Today we're talking about our parents, what they mean to us, how God wants us to relate to them, and we're going to focus today on those who struggle to honor their parents, because Scott, from our BBC article, is not alone. And I believe that God can help. We're going to begin this evening in Ephesians Chapter 6. If you have your Bibles, you can turn to Ephesians 6. Here, Paul is laying out the expectations for parents and little children in a household, and he quotes our commandment, the 5th commandment. I'll read it to you, and it'll be on the screens as well. This is Ephesians 6, beginning in verse 1. "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may go well with you and you may enjoy long life on the earth." So in verse 1, he says, "Children, obey your parents." In verse 2, he says, "Honor your father and mother." When I first heard this verse, I was about 6 years old in little kid Sunday school, and I thought that was a couplet. I thought it was 2 ways of saying the same thing. Youngsters, obey your parents, honor your father and mother. And so I came to the conclusion that that 2 misconceptions that I came to that day. The first is that this commandment means that we are always to obey our parents. And the second was that this commandment was basically for children. But even hearing this in little kid Sunday school, I knew that this was going to end, right? I knew that adults didn't have to obey their parents in the same way as I, as a 6-year-old, had to obey my parents, at least not in Western countries so heavily influenced by Christianity. If you grew up in an Eastern culture, perhaps there was an expectation that you would obey your parents the whole way. But Christianity doesn't teach that our ultimate allegiance is to our parents. In fact, in Luke 14:26, Jesus says that if anyone comes to be his disciple and does not hate his own father and mother, by comparison and loyalty, they can't be his disciple at all. Very strong words. We don't have many stories of Jesus interacting with his earthly parents. One of the ones we do have comes from Luke chapter 2. Jesus there is 12 years old, and they go to Jerusalem, and he decides it's time for him to begin his studies in the temple. His parents decide that it is not time for him to do that, and they come back for him. In this story, the boy Jesus honors his father and mother by deferring to them and their decision and returning with them to Nazareth. So he clearly shares Paul's understanding that what it means for him to honor his father and mother at that age is to obey them, to go back with them to Nazareth. Now compare this to a story in Matthew chapter 12. Jesus is now in his early 30s, and he's working. He's got a crowd of people with him. He's ministering, he's healing, he's preaching. And his mother and his brothers arrive, and his mom sends a couple of disciples in to tap Jesus on the shoulder and let him know that his mother would like to speak with him over there. This is what Jesus says. "Who is my mother and who are my brothers?" Pointing to his disciples, he said, "Here are my mother and my brothers, for whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and my sister and my mother." So here's what I want you to see. Jesus' relationship with his mother changed both in authority and in loyalty. When he was 12 years old, a word from his mother was sufficient to alter the entire course of his life, get him to defer his studies. By the time he's in his early 30s, a word from his mother is not enough to get him to drop what he's doing right now. And this is perfectly right and good. It was right for Jesus to come out from under the authority of his earthly parents and come under the authority of his heavenly Father. This is my goal with my own children. I have 5 children. If you know me, you know this. They range from 2 years old up to 14 years old. Little baby girl turns 3 next week. And so if I ask her something, if I say, "Baby girl, please pick up your books," there's really one of 2 ways that she can respond. One of them is, "Okay, daddy, dad." That's honor. The other one is, "I can't." And that's dishonor. And it's as simple as that. When you're 3, it's as simple as that. If you're 3 here with us today, sermon over. Thanks for joining us. But even for my older kids, it isn't quite so straightforward anymore. If I ask my 14-year-old, "Hey, will you take out the trash?" and he says, "I can't," I don't respond to him, "You dishonor me with your insolence," right? Like, that's, okay, dial it back, Dad. Because at 14, he could know something that I don't. And because he does honor me, generally speaking, if he says that he can't take out the trash, I assume that he believes that at least, and there's probably something about the situation that I don't know. So I respond by asking, why not? So even within my own house, the differing ages of my children mean that honoring me and my wife Kristen looks different for each of them. So, if honoring changes in its expression throughout the years and throughout different circumstances, is there anything that we can say that honoring always means? Like something that is consistent from birth all the way through, regardless of circumstance? I believe that there is. The Hebrew word translated honor in Exodus 20:12 is the Hebrew word kabod. And if you're a longtime change pointer from the Dan Jarrell era, you may well be familiar with the Hebrew word kabod. It's one of his favorites. It means weightiness. And in the ancient world, that also means value, because this is how they measured money. When you read your Bible, you'll read all the denominations of money. It's all in shekels and minas and talents. Those are not denominations of coins. They're measures of weight. They didn't have central banks and monetary policy, so if you wanted to buy this herd of sheep, you would stick silver on the scale until you tipped it at 50 shekels and the sheep are yours. And that's how it worked. Shekels. So to kabod someone is to remember their weight, their value, and not to treat them as cheap trash. If you treat your parents like they have no value to you, then you dishonor them. To be even more specific, honoring always means treating your parents with dignity and courtesy and seeking their long-term good. Treating them with dignity and with courtesy and seeking their long-term good. That is true whether you're 8 or 68. And it's true whether you had wonderful, kind, loving parents who made your childhood a preview of heaven, or if you had wicked, sinful parents who made your childhood a warning against hell. We are all called to treat our parents with dignity, courtesy, and seeking their long-term good. Now, this does not mean that as grown people, we are prohibited from disagreeing with our parents, confronting them about sin, negotiating compromises, or establishing boundaries. All of those things may actually be necessary in order to seek their long-term good. Jesus struck compromises with his parents. At the wedding at Cana, Jesus' mother came to him, and the party had run out of wine, and she wanted him to make more. She makes that request. He says it's not his time yet. There is a disagreement between mother and son. How does Jesus deal with it? She wants lots of wine. He wants no wine, and so he ends up making 1 cup of wine for the bride and groom. He struck a compromise with his mom. And in this, he did not dishonor her, because he did it with dignity and with courtesy and respect for who she was as his mom. Because there's more than one way to disagree with someone or to establish a boundary. Am I right? Let's take the example of Scott from the beginning of the article we started the sermon with today. His mother made comments that he viewed as racist, and then his father sent him an email defending her with a video that he found even worse. 2 ways to handle it. First, there's what he did. He called them racists. He said that he couldn't believe that they held their views given their Jewish heritage. He basically said that they had betrayed their heritage. And then he cut off all contact with them and had not spoken to them in over 2 years at the time of the publication of the article. That's an option. Is that honor or dishonor? Dishonor. Now, what would an honor have looked like while still establishing a healthy boundary with his father? Scott said that his primary concern was for his own children. He didn't want his parents' ideology being taught to his children. Okay, well, what if he had responded with an email like this? Dad, you and I are not going to see eye to eye on this topic. I watched the video you sent, and I don't agree with the ideas that it's communicating. This is an important moral issue for me, and it's important to me to teach my children my perspective on this topic. I'm worried that you would contradict me to the kids with the ideas from that video. Would you be willing to agree not to discuss the topic of race in Europe when my children can hear? Is that honor or dishonor? Honor. Now, if the father agrees to those terms, then Scott has successfully confronted the problem, had the disagreement, protected his children, and preserved his relationship with his parents. Scott wins everything, and he did it through honor. If the father had rejected those terms and insisted that it was his right as grandpa to educate those grandchildren on these issues in any way that he saw fit, Scott might still have ended contact between his parents and his children, but again, he would have had 2 options. Option A, then you'll never see your grandparents again, grandchildren again. Option B, Dad, I don't agree that that is your right as grandpa, so I'm going to use my right as dad to intervene and stop you from seeing the kids while this is your goal. If in future you'd be willing not to discuss this topic with the kids, we'd love to have you back. Honor. to tell your parents that you will never speak to them again, regardless of any future action on their part, is to say to them that they hold absolutely no value to you whatsoever. It is kind of an ultimate devaluation, an ultimate dishonor. You are saying that they do not deserve the courtesy that we grant passersby on the street, that of seeing our face. That they do not deserve the dignity that we would pay to the grocer at the grocery store. They are beneath small talk. Now, as I've been writing this sermon, my big fear has been that people will write me off as saying that we should remain forever appendages, thanking our parents, kind of regardless of all their actions. I'm not saying that in any way. For the adult Christian believer, our first loyalty is not to our parents. We seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. In fact, the entire reason that parental authority is given in the first place, according to Ephesians 6, is so that the parent can teach us to follow God. Let me read you Ephesians 6:4. This is the next verse after 6:3, where we left off. Fathers, do not exasperate your children, frustrate them, drive them crazy. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. The training and instruction of the Lord. To be a disciple of Jesus means that we follow God, not our parents. But when we're little children, we often follow God through our parents. Like if you grew up as a Christian, you were a Christian when you were a little kid, I can bet you right now it's because your parents were Christians. And at that young age, you relate to God through your relationship with your parents in many ways. It's mediated through them. Your relationship to God and your relationship to your parents is deeply, deeply intertwined during your childhood. But as we grow, God's desire is not that we would be brought up forever by our parents. It's that our parents would one day be able to hand back to God the child that God one precious day gave to them. A day is coming in my near future, when my sons will be adults. And then they will be both my brothers in the Lord, while always remaining my sons. The purpose of my life is to honor God as king. And so as adult men, there's nothing that they could do that would be more honoring to me than to honor him. So even now, if one of my sons comes to me with a charge of sin, Dad, you committed sin against me, I don't take that as a sign of disrespect. That's not your place to question me. I'm the father. I take that as a young brother in the Lord coming forward to see if Matthew 18 works. And so I ask myself, is it true? Did I do that? Is there a way that he could have seen it that way? Everything I would do if one of you came to me with an accusation of sin. If I did the thing, I have an opportunity to apologize and to reconcile. And as Jesus says in Matthew 18, he regains his brother. The relationship is restored. And I'm doing all this because I want him to see that Matthew 18 works, that this is a reasonable and healthy and appropriate way to deal with someone who has sinned against you, and get him ready to follow God alongside me. All this to say, I believe that healthy adult parent to adult child relationships are in many ways very much like any healthy relationship between two adults. There can be disagreement. There doesn't have to be overt obedience and authority. There can be healthy boundaries. But the one thing that we cannot do as we are establishing all these things is to dishonor our parents, to treat them as worthless and shame them. Which I'm sorry to say, as we read in this article at the beginning, is an increasingly popular and celebrated path to take. Dr. Joshua Coleman, he's a family psychologist. He's got 40 years of experience in practice seeing families. He wrote a book last year, released a book called Rules of Estrangement: Why Adult Children Cut Ties and How to Heal the Conflict. And he talks about a cultural shift in the way that we view parent-child conflict and parent estrangement that has changed over the last 30 years. Here's how Dr. Coleman characterizes the shift. While there's nothing especially modern about family conflict or a desire to feel insulated from it, conceptualizing the estrangement of a relationship with a family member as an expression of personal growth and achievement is almost certainly new. In generations past, if you had a contentious relationship with your parents, so bad that you had to cut off contact, that was seen as a pity, a bad thing. Maybe not your fault, but still negative, like getting sick. If you learned that a friend was in that situation, you probably would not inquire further, presuming that it was, a sensitive topic. That is not the case anymore. I frequently see posts and other things across the internet openly shaming parents, detailing the ways in which the original poster is vastly superior to their parents in ethics, in capability, in understanding. My foolish, ignorant parents and their backward ways. And these posts get plenty of love. Our generation is rewarding us for publicly shaming our parents. It is increasingly seen, as Dr. Coleman put it, as an expression of personal growth and achievement. Now, this doesn't arise from nowhere. And I do want to talk about where I believe it arises from, because when I talk to people who have participated in this behavior, their objective, their goal is not to shame their parents. They're trying to get something else, and shaming their parents is a means or a byproduct to the thing that they're trying to do. As we millennials, that's people of my generation, have drifted away from organized Christianity, we haven't joined other faiths. We've sort of stepped outside of Christianity's front door onto the lawn and camped there. Almost all of the non-Christian millennials that I know hold to 90% of Christian morality and ethics. We are all about love and kindness and empathy and the equality of man. All Christian virtues. The piece that we've gotten rid of is our doctrine of salvation. We no longer believe in the cross of Jesus Christ to forgive sins. But we still need a doctrine of salvation because we still live in a fallen world. We still have our own sin to deal with. We still have the sin of other people to deal with. And we need a way to understand this, to rationalize and conceptualize it. So here's what we've done. We've taken the core of Christian ethics and we've bolted onto it a doctrine of salvation based on a pseudo-psychology. Millennials who famously don't go to church go to therapy at rates far exceeding any previous generation. One Wall Street Journal article referred to us as the therapy generation. Now, I have no issue with going to therapy, seeking the help of a mental health professional, but we're not going there because we're mentally ill. In 1961, psychiatrist Thomas Zaz published a now famous book in the field titled The Myth of Mental Illness, Foundations of a Theory of Personal Conduct. And in the book, Zaz argues that the majority of people who seek out a therapist or other behavioral health professional are not going there because they're experiencing what those in the field would traditionally consider mental illness. They're going there because they have problems in living. They need counsel, they need help, they need to think things through, they need someone to listen to them. So my contention is that we millennials are going to therapists not to treat traditional mental illnesses largely, but to replace the pastoral ministry that we've abandoned. At the same time, the field of psychotherapy has grown to enfold us. The definition of what is considered a diagnosable disorder has expanded rapidly and dramatically over the last 40 or 50 years. As psychologist Nick Haslam puts it, phenomena that might previously have been understood as moral failings, bad habits, personal weaknesses, medical problems, character foibles, or ordinary vicissitudes, how's that for a word, now find shelter under the umbrella concept of mental disorder. So here's what it looks like. 30 years ago, if you felt awkward and uncomfortable in social situations and meeting new people and crowds, you were said to be shy. That's shyness. That's what a shy person is. Today, we would describe this phenomenon in ourselves as social anxiety. That is the new clinical name for it. Now, let me be clear. I am not indicting the field of psychology or psychotherapy. I am not saying that any of these disorders are fake in any way. I'm not discouraging anyone listening right now from seeking the help of a qualified therapist or other behavioral health professional. That can be very appropriate and, in fact, very helpful. What I'm challenging is internet self-diagnosis and treatment and self-certified expertise. Seeing a post about some disorder that's 85 words long and diagnosing ourselves, internalizing that into the story of our lives. I see, I have that. And we know that we have it because, having read this 85-word-long post, we have self-certified ourselves as behavioral health professionals from the University of Instagram. This does not make us happy. Again, Dr. Coleman. Studies show that expanding the list of mental disorders to incorporate more and more experiences of everyday life can create a feeling of decreased agency, increased pessimism about the potential for recovery, and decreased confidence in one's capacity to exert control over his or her challenges. The things that we believe about ourselves, the stories we tell ourselves, affect us very deeply. Scrolling these posts, self-diagnosing with disorders, it leaves us feeling pessimistic about our lives and our chances and disempowered about our ability to affect change. And who is responsible with ruining our lives in this way? According to the internet, it is whatever toxic people inflicted the past traumas that have created in us these mental disorders. And when we think back on the history of our lives, on who has inflicted the most kind of negative or confrontational experiences, for every single one of us, regardless of quality of parent, from amazing to terrible, parents are always going to make the top 5, just from the size and scope of their influence. The great irony is that this idea is already largely discredited in the real field of psychology. Again, Dr. Coleman. These suppositions are rooted in the outdated blank slate musings of Locke and Rousseau, Freud's now discredited psychosexual stages and ideas about repression and memory, Maslow's theories of self-actualization, and John Watson's grandiose claims that behaviorism could create any kind of adult wanted by a parent. Contemporary research challenges this received wisdom, and yet families are being torn apart on the weight of its faulty propositions. We are being presented with a powerful worldview that tells us that the best way for us, the most healthy way for us to understand our parents is as the source of our traumas. That the right way to remember them is to focus on all of the worst experiences that we had, all of the most abusive moments, the most neglectful moments, because those were the moments that defined our relationship with our parents. Those are the ones that made us who we are today. We should be incredibly careful in applying such a metric to any person, because Jesus says that the standard that we use with other people, we will find being applied to ourselves. Philippians 4:8 offers a very different idea about what's healthy to meditate on. Let me read it to you. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lowly, whatever is commendable, if there's any excellence, anything you can find, anything worthy of praise, think about these things. This verse tells us that the right way to think about not just our parents, but anybody, is not to meditate on the worst aspects of them, but on the best. You might even have to start with, they're a human being made in God's image. That's good about them. They didn't kill me. That's good about them. Whatever is honorable. So hearing this, for everybody in the room, we could rate kind of our relationship with our parents on a scale of 1 to 10 if we wanted to, right? If you had good and righteous parents who brought you up in a kind and loving life, you can see God's love for you in their eyes, then this is not a hard one, right? It's not hard for you to honor your parents. You'll do that naturally. This week is a friendly reminder to get that done. Thanks for joining us. If you had a challenging or contentious, particularly a very challenging or contentious relationship, this might be a really big ask. And so I want to spend our few remaining minutes this evening talking about reasons why you should honor a parent who you find totally dishonorable. And I know what I'm asking here. I have nice parents, but I also have a lot of friends. I have a friend whose dad sold him as a toddler for $400 and a set of truck rims. I have a friend whose dad shamed him for years over his use of adult content, and then it was discovered that the father had been in a string of serial adulteries, and when caught, he deserted the family, left them destitute. So I know what I'm asking. Here are 4 reasons why you should honor a parent that you find completely dishonorable. Reason number 1, because God commands it and says that it will go well with you if you do it. You may have the relationship of trust in God already that you would just take his word for it. And that is a good thing to do. He's not lying to you. Trusting God really is the central of Christian practice. And so if that is sufficient for you this evening, that gives you something to wrestle with. But if that relationship is particularly contentious, it might be helpful to have a few other reasons, perhaps why God asks us to honor a dishonorable parent. Reason number 2, because your relationship with your parents affects your relationship with God. Parents are the first models of God to a child. They're the first models of God we had. The parent has authority, God has authority. The parent loves you, God loves you. The parent is to be honored, God is to be honored. Jesus taught us to think of God as our Father. Ephesians 3:14 says that God is the Father from whom all fatherhood gets its name. Ephesians 5:21 tells us to be imitators of God like little children. And Jesus says that if we don't become like little children, we can't enter his kingdom. The point is this, that the same machinery that is being used inside your heart to interact with your parents is being used to interact with your God. And if the one is full of bitterness and resentment and hatred, it's going to affect the other. Forgiving a parent who was very, very far from modeling God's character and nature to you can seem like a cop-out, like it's excusing abuse and ignoring sin. That's not what it is. Forgiveness is looking exactly at the sin for exactly what it was. Remember, knowing exactly what damage it did and choosing actively to cancel the debt yourself. It is an empowered choice. Proverbs 19:11 says that it is a person's glory to overlook an offense. That word glory, it's kabod. It's honor. It is their strength and their honor that puts them in that position to be able to cancel the offense. And Jesus says that when we choose actively not to forgive, it affects our ability to receive his forgiveness. Reason number 3, because honor begets honor and shame begets shame. When we shame other people or criticize them, we invite them to defend themselves. They don't like feeling shame. That's very unpleasant. Rejection? No, thank you. So you say, hey, you did this. And they say, well, I wouldn't have done that if you hadn't. Right? It's getting the shame off. When they're unable to send the shame back at the shame sender, they will pay it forward to someone else. We all know this to be true from the playground, right? That bully who's pushing everybody around on the playground, what do we say? he probably gets bullied at home. Because shame begets shame. This creates a culture of shaming, of criticism, of defensiveness, of deceit, and of discouragement. All of those things grow together in one wicked tree. And that is what I would refer to as a toxic culture. But honor also begets honor. We read out of Ephesians Chapter 6 today. That whole section begins with the heading in my Bible, Instructions for Christian Households. And the summary statement at the beginning is submit to one another, honor one another out of reverence, out of deep honor for Christ. And then it goes through and it shows the wives how to honor, and the husbands how to honor, and the children how to honor, and the parents how to honor. And the point is this, that everyone is to be honoring everyone in a way that's appropriate to their position in that particular family. That's the vision. If you wouldn't want to honor your parents because they would never honor you, try honoring them. It's amazing how when you treat someone honorably, they have a tendency to become more honorable. Honor begets honor. If you're the parent of a teenager, you're fighting with a teenager, they disrespect you, you come down on them, they get even more disrespectful, and it's really starting to go downhill. Try honoring them instead. Treat them with increased respect and honor and see if you don't get more honor back out. And give it like several weeks. They are 15, right? Like, don't be ridiculous. See if you don't get more honor in return. Final reason number 4, and then we're done. Pray for us, we're done for this evening. Because Jesus chose to honor us. The central story of our faith is that while we were yet sinners, while we were still abusing, Christ died for us. The godly for the ungodly, the honorable for the dishonorable. While enduring the greatest trauma the world has ever seen, Jesus Christ looked down from that cross at the toxic people who were abusing him, and he said, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. Jesus Christ used one of his dying breaths to honor the men who were murdering him. And so we, as his followers, then, are charged with and empowered to bring his honor to the world that we live in, just as he did. This is what 1 Peter 2:17 says. It says, honor not just our parents, but everyone, to love the brotherhood, to fear God, and to honor the emperor. And they weren't any more fond of their emperor than Luke Skywalker was of his emperor. This is not a nice and kind emperor. He's rounding them up and feeding them to lions. And Peter says, Christ is so honorable and so weighty and so strong that he can honor even the emperor through you. So if your parent feels like an emperor, it may feel impossible to honor and forgive them. I would encourage you with this kind of final advice, not to focus on forgiving your parent, because focusing on forgiving someone always just draws your mind back to the offense that's being forgiven, which is really kind of meditating on their sin, which is not going to get you anywhere. Instead, I would focus on the forgiveness of Christ for you. Go get more forgiveness of Jesus. Read a book on the forgiveness of Jesus. There's like 1,000. Search it up on Right Now Media, free account in the ChangePoint app. Fill your mind and your heart with the forgiveness and the mercy of God. You'll be surprised to find how much easier it is to share with others when you're freshly full of it yourself. Okay, pastor's challenge. My pastor's challenges are short. Here's the pastor's challenge. Write down 5 things that you can be thankful for about your parents. 5 things. Parents, living or dead, honorable or dishonorable, write down 5 things. If you have a relationship with your parents, would it be appropriate to share some of this with them? Go right ahead. That would be very honoring. Even if you don't, do this as an exercise, maybe not to honor your parents, but ultimately to honor God. Pray with me.